Earlier, you mentioned the activist community and their fear that complacency could set in regarding Obama's handling of the issue. Is there any frustration within the community regarding how Obama's handled the issue so far? I mean, he almost ignored it for all of 2009 until he gave the State of the Union. Do people think he took too long to address the issue at all? Or?
I mean, I don't think I can speak on behalf of the entire activist community on the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In my personal opinion, yeah, he took too long. He should have been a little bit stronger on it. I know that there were a lot of questions about, he needed to be politically correct in trying to support healthcare and doing all these things, but I think he really let this issue go by the wayside for long, and I really don't think that without Senator Gillibrand we would be kind of where we are today, because I mean she was going to attach it to the defense budget the past year, and in order to stop her from doing it, they were promised a hearing, and that was one of the reasons why we got a hearing. And so I do think Obama needed to step up and do it louder. I think even in this State of the Union speech, it was like one line in a 2-hour speech, or not 2 hours, but in however long the State of the Union was this year. And I think that, to relegate that huge of an issue, something he really campaigned on, to one line in a speech, I think that kind of shows where his priorities are, and I wish he would step up and take a stronger role, and especially a lot more gay issues.
But let me ask you something. Is it really that huge of an issue compared to all of the other issues that he campaigned on? I mean, as president, especially when you're campaigning, you're making promises to everybody. There's healthcare reform, there's financial reform, there's immigration reform, there's cap and trade, all these sorts of things. I actually think that having made progress on this issue that addresses a minority is a pretty big win if he gets it within the next year before the 2010 elections.
Well, ultimately, it boils down to a question of what are our country's ideals, and we've finally affirmed that it's an ideal that all Americans are entitled to quality health care. But what are our other ideas? I mean, we're still behind most industrialized countries in terms of having or letting LGBT people serve openly in the military. Is that something that we want to have sort of against us? Is that something that we want to reflect on our country's character? And that's all of these issues that Obama's juggling right now can be boiled down to a question of what is the national character, and I think they can. If you look at it in that perspective, they're all equally as important.
But the thing is, as president, it's not just his job to be a figurehead and present particular ideals to the world. He's also a technocrat. He has to get policy done effectively, and I think what he's doing right now is he's trying to get as much done as possible. So unfortunately, as president, you do have to set priorities. You do have to decide, do I want to stop this trend of having hundreds of military servicemen ejected from the military each year, or would I rather act on the priority of ensuring millions of individuals and children?
Well, I think what we have to remember here is that, just as Sean said earlier, 75% of the American public is in support of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So when it comes to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that's something that's pretty deliverable under most calculations. So, Obama has lost a lot of support among the progressive community in both the way healthcare ended up being, without a public option, without, kind of moving towards that single-payer system that a lot of the progressive community wants. But Don't Ask, Don't Tell is something that he could do that would be deliverable, that would be good for both our national security. It would be good for, really supporting LGBTQ rights and making sure that that's a fundamental part of our country's ideals. And I think, something like if he were to really step up and fight for the repeal of DOMA, which of course is something that I support, I think that, yes, he'd be running into a legislative battle that would be really hard, and might, kind of throw off the legislative cycle, even though I don't think that's necessarily a reason why he shouldn't step up to that fight. But when it comes to something like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that can be something that's deliverable quickly and can be really effective. And then we can kind of continue with our legislation. It's something that can be fought along with other priorities and really talking about making our society more open and more accepting of all of our communities, which is why I think the healthcare bill is so big.
Well, and I think, One more thing to note historically is that the integration of the military happened at a time where there were lots of other legislation issues going on. So, but you still managed to have a political environment where you could bring racial integration into the military structure, and the military ended up being the first governmental organization to really do that. The idea that like the American public only has like the capacity to think about one issue at a time is like rather insulting, and I think but it speaks to the level of partisanship that there is in the community.
You're not talking about the American people only have the ability; it's that Congress really only has the ability to act on a couple things at a time, at least in regards to major legislation.
Well, the current Congress does, yes.
And
historically, that wasn't like 50 years ago. That wasn't the way things were, or 60 years ago.
Unfortunately, that's a reality we live in. It's very, very difficult to govern right now. So, it's not within Obama's power to enact all these things, regardless of public opinion.
He can also take a stronger stand, though. I mean, yes, you're right. It's not Obama's job. It's Congress's job. But Congress has a committee system, which means they should be working on multiple bills at once. Because I don't really understand how the Armed Services Committee is getting involved in the healthcare debate all that much, with the exception of really making sure. But I think Veterans Affairs is its own committee, so that's kind of something that is different there. So I think that we should be expecting our legislative leaders to be taking on more than one issue at a time, even if it's not politically feasible at the moment, and we should ask them to lead on that and kind of go forward.